What is up, guys? This is Paul, and today's what I want to do is talk about this track that I made, which is called The Masters. This is for the SynthMaster track competition, where basically we have to make a track using only instances of SynthMaster 2.9 or SynthMaster 1. And throughout this track, which I'll also have a link here in the description where you can hear the original track in the project, basically I use 37 instances of SynthMaster to create everything from all the sound effects, atmospheres, drums, pretty much everything. There are only a few things that I used samples for, which were mainly a few drums, loops, and this drum fill that I found. So let's go through and I'll show you guys all the channels and kind of some of the processing that I did. So starting off with the kick and bass, if we listen to what's going on here, this kick was an external sample that I found. I wish I could find what bank it was, but anyway, I think it's from the Shantai bank. Then the first sub bass, this is a sub bass created in SynthMaster 1. It just consists of sawtooth and sort of like PWM waves, and that's going through pretty much an EQ, waves R bass. This compressor, all that's doing is just leveling out the volume. And then this LFO tool, which is just designed to make sure that it's making room for the kick. So you can see it kind of bleeds over a little bit because we have to have a little bit of release so we don't get any clicks, but we want to make sure we're chopping that off so that there's enough room for the kick to come in. Also, just so you guys know, I actually have every single minute of this project being made from nothing to where it is right now. So go ahead and check out my channel if there's anything you want to see in particular, me making it. I just figured rather than spending 14, 15 hours watching those videos, if you want to get a quick overview, definitely check this out. So then moving on, we have the mid basses, and that's consisting of 4 different mid bass sounds. And the processing on the group channel is pretty simple. There's just a simple EQ, this Vertigo VSC2, which is kind of like a compressor gluing it together, this overdrive, which is just distortion applied to the group, Native Instruments Replica XT, which is just adding a little bit of delay, and a compressor just to even out the volume, and an LFO tool for sidechaining all the mid basses, and finally gain for automation. And then last but not least, these are filters that are designed for automating in and out, and you can kind of hear it moving around. And then a Mag EQ4, which is used to kind of boost just some of the top end of the sound without it being too harsh. And then another EQ for just cutting out some of the parts that I didn't like. So let's go through these basses one by one. So this is the first mid bass. This is SynthMaster 1. This, I don't even know what this was. Oh, it's an FM sounding. I use an FM wavetable, and also I think I use this another pulse oscillator. And what this is, for those of you wondering, this is a Max for Live device that I created for designing these bass lines, because I always feel like I'm fighting with Live's piano roll when I'm changing these notes. And so it's basically like a glorified arpeggiator for bass lines. This is going through an EQ and a phaser, but if we listen to the raw sound with the EQ and the phaser is very, very slight, but just giving it a little bit of movement. Then going on to the second mid bass, this one I didn't use that uplift bass line because for some reason it was giving me trouble. And this is just a simple sidetrance bass. So I'm doing scooping out all the low end to make room for the sub, and putting a Mag EQ4 on there to just boost a little bit of the highs, just very slightly. I don't even know if I can hear a difference right now. Ha! Mid bass 3 is a completely different pattern, so this corresponds to the octaves that are used. And this is another SynthMaster 1. Going through another EQ, once again, cutting out the lows and then boosting kind of this mid-high frequencies. And this is kind of like a unison-y bass. They're both free-running oscillators, so they're just kind of being spread out. And last but not least, we have mid bass 4. Once again, these are all kind of adding body. The main sound is this mid bass 2, the sidetrancey bass line, and then the rest of them are kind of coming together to give it a little bit more movement and add a little bit more. So this is, once again, I cut a lot of lows out because I didn't want them interfering with the other ones, but this is just kind of giving it a little bit of character. I think I used this bassline reverse. I don't know if it's a wave. Yeah, it's a wavetable, along with just a sawtooth wave. So let's hear what all these sound like. Cool, let's move on to the percussion. Checking how much time. So first of all, we have 3 claps. These are all made in SynthMaster 2, and these were all from this this Booleant Trance Electro kit, which you can find under samples and multi-samples. This might be exclusive, I'm not sure, to the Insignia Club Essentials. I'm not 100% sure if that's what you need to get this drum kit or not, but it has a lot of different samples. So there are 3 claps. Let's play them all. Clap 1, clap 2, clap 3. So each one just a little bit of EQ. This third clap is going through the stereo spreader just to kind of spread it out around the stereo field. And then playing all of them together on this group, I have actually a couple compressors just to kind of glue the sounds together. So maybe I'll turn all this crap off and I'll kind of add it one by one, so you can hear what all this stuff is doing. So turning all this off, and whoops, let's go ahead and listen. So just reverb, a little bit of ambience. First compressor to glue the sound together. Overdrive doing a lot of work adding high end. EQ to cut off the lows and the super high. This is kind of getting that initial transient, so notice we have it on a pretty short release. Mag EQ4 to boost some of the highs and take out a little bit of the mids again. And finally, this compressor I think is really slamming the sounds. Take a listen. And yeah, basically just doing that. After that, we have our open hat. This was an external sample that I used. A ride cymbal, which is also, whoops, an external sample. We were allowed to use external drum samples. Whoops. This is a closed hat from SynthMaster 2. And all that I'm doing is using this auto pan to kind of pan it around the stereo field. I could have used an LFO within SynthMaster, but I like processing them as a group. Second closed hat. Once again, this auto pan is making sure every other note is pretty much panning left and right. Then we go to these loops. These are just standard loop sounds that I found from, I think one from the Dave Parkinson pack from Freshly Squeezed and the other from the Activa pack from Freshly Squeezed. Nothing super exciting going on. I didn't really do anything other than filters and LFO tools, except this one has an auto filter, which is moving around like that. Now we get on to the fun stuff. So let me go over to the, well, let me start here with this sort of, this intro pluck one. I'm actually not using this. I'm actually not using this at all in the track. This was for the longer like club edit of the track, but since this track had to be within 3 to 5 minutes, I ended up not using it. Whoops. First is this first pad, which is very kind of short. This was made in SynthMaster 1. Take a listen. And then when it's open, pretty straightforward. It's just a super saw pad, but kind of has a nice fade in, so it sounds like a bunch of strings playing together. Second pad. This one's, I think, a little bit more, less of a attack and release. Let me just play these at the drop. A little bit of a super saw sound, only 4 voices of unison, and then 6 voices of kind of this pulse or square wave. And this is doing pulse width modulation here using this phase, because with the square wave it won't do anything, but with the pulse wave it'll actually control the pulse width. So that's what I'm doing with this, to kind of also give it another string sound with a different character. Last but not least, this third pad is really giving it a lot of character. And this is using this Megan Vox B sample, pretty straightforward, and then it's just going into the pads group. Really what's on the group is EQ8, nice Arts Acoustic reverb sound just to kind of give it that big ethereal quality. I could have used the reverb within SynthMaster for a lot of these sounds, but I like processing them as a group. It also saves CPU, and I'm just used to doing it that way. Then an LFO tool for just automation, for sidechain I mean, And last but not least, low pass and high pass filters for automating them around during the breakdown. So next up we have our fill pad, and all this is doing is this section right before the hands up part. So you can hear it's just basically a sawtooth wave with a resonant filter opening up and kind of gives it that swelling sound. Oops, helps if I solo it. Delay and reverb, Arts Acoustic reverb again, and then just a simple ping pong delay on a dotted eighth note. And you'll see this delay used a lot. So that's the pads. The next thing I want to go over is the sub pad. So this is used in the breakdown where we don't have the sub. Let's take a listen. And this is just a SynthMaster 1 sound, detuned oscillators, some 2 octaves down, and very, very slight amount of them another octave down. Probably don't even notice that that's there. I don't even think I noticed that that's there. And then this is kind of the standard processing, and you'll see this across a lot of tracks. Simple EQ for low and high pass filters on pretty much every track. This LFO tool, which the amount is being automated for certain sections when the kick is playing, because I do use this MIDI sometimes when the kick is playing, but during the breakdown I don't use any of that. And then we get into the part where we have the sub lead. Now this is used here. It sounds pretty boring on its own, but this is actually a trick I got from James Diamond, where you can use these to bolster the low end of your leads when you don't have your kick and sub and bass playing. So all it is 3 sine waves, each an octave apart, and then I'm using the arpeggiator so that when you play a note, it's alternating between low and high octaves and via 16th notes. Pretty cool, and then pretty simple, just some EQ, and once again this LFO tool, just to add a little bit of movement and sidechain, even though the kick isn't playing generally when this is playing. The other thing I just realized I did not do is I did not go over all the fun, exciting keys and leads and stuff. I thought that was later. Okay, so let me go over the keys going on. So during the breakdown, I have this key playing, which this is kind of inspired by a patch in the factory bank of Silent called Star Child. Take a listen. It's going through Arts Acoustic reverb, pretty straightforward, but it sounds really nice here. Pretty cool. This second key is kind of a modified version of that patch that's designed to give the second part of the drop a little bit more interest. Careful, it's going to be loud. So this is a SynthMaster 1 sound. All it is a single sawtooth oscillator pitched up an octave, and then the pitch modulation is what's really, and the ADSR envelope is what's giving it that sound. Guess I should show you guys this one too. This is a very simple single sawtooth oscillator. I think I have automation on here. Let's see, maybe here. Oh, huh. And you can hear that delay really working. I think I used, yeah, wait, did I? Oh, I didn't use the delay here. I used a delay on the pluck bus, or the lead and pluck bus, I think, which is, no, I guess I didn't. Where is this delay coming from? Ha! That's really weird. Oh, it's coming from my send. So I have this nice little send channel set up with this, I don't know, I like this reverb that I made where it just has this resonant filter sweeping around. That's where that's coming from. So this is a nice kind of key sound. A little bit of the velocity is mapped to the cutoff too, so it gives it a nice kind of playable quality in my opinion. Then we get down here. This isn't really doing anything. This was just a render of this track because I was having some issues when I was recording. Well, I just recorded it a few minutes ago, but when I was trying to master the track, for some reason, whenever I was rendering this down, it would render this with the mod wheel all the way down. It's just a weird quirk that Live was having for some reason. Then we move on to the leads. Now this first lead is probably the most important part of the lead. It's the main body, and this is a SynthMaster 1 lead with just basically a super saw and then a version an octave higher, but the volume is turned down. Take a listen to this. I'm not really doing any EQ here other than a slight boost to the highs. I mean, very minuscule because most of the processing is being done on the group, but I didn't really find I needed to EQ this too much, although I am using the built-in equalizer here to boost the high shelf a little bit, and then I'm using the built-in delay. It's great sound. What's also doing a lot of the good work is this Arts Acoustic Reverb here on the bus channel of the leads. Second lead is a SynthMaster 2 patch, and this one is using both another sort of super saw sound and also pulse width modulation. Oh, it's muted. Ha. So take a listen to this one. And last but not least, the third lead. This is kind of a weird SynthMaster 1 lead that has a lot of pitch modulation going on, and I chose, just some random wavetable just to make it a little bit more interesting. Along with, of course, another super saw, because this is trance. What can we do without it? So let's hear all these leads together. Let me actually build them all in. I'll start with the first one. Start here. Second one's adding a little bit of body, especially in the mid-range. And this third lead, because this super saw is an octave higher, it kind of gives it a little bit more of the high-end energy too. Now we're going to move on to the plucks, and the plucks are very, very closely related to the leads, so they're almost worth playing along with the leads. I'll play them all together once I kind of solo them. So this is the first pluck. It's very simple. It's two sawtooth oscillators. One is a straight-up saw, and the other I use this saw square or square saw waveform, which interpolates between a saw and a square wave, and just used it somewhere, but more on the saw spectrum, just to give it a different texture. I actually have two delays going on. Well, actually, just kidding. This delay I used just for the intro because I automate this so during the intro, bounces around, has a lot of delay because I didn't want to go full in with all the leads. And then in the main section, I'm only relying on SynthMaster's delay. So in the intro, it's actually having two delays. It's having this built-in delay, which is ping-ponging around at actually an eighth note, and then there's a dotted eighth note with this weird filter, resonant filter going around in the intro that has a super, super long decay. And pluck 2 is very similar. This just adds a little bit of body. Let's take a look at what's going on here. So this was pluck 1. Sounds a little bit similar, but it's a little less harsh. So this is a sawtooth and also a pulse wave that has, so it's a pulse wave where I modify the pulse width a little bit. And what's kind of going on here is I'm using this decimort from D16 to do a little bit of sample, like resampling, very, very slight. It just adds a little bit of detail on the high end. And this is probably the same delay that I had on the other one, except this is actually going throughout the drop and throughout the rest of the track. Cool, and then these two are unused. So let me go ahead and play this part of the drop, and I'll add in all this stuff one by one. So let's start with the first lead. Second lead. Now the third lead. Now the first pluck. Now the second pluck. And now this key, which I recently added. Just kind of give a little bit more interest to the melody. Cool. Let's keep going. I don't want this to be super, super long. I'd love to talk about all this stuff again, but yeah. So basically here we also have crashes from SynthMaster 2. This is using that Boolean drum kit. And if you listen to how this sounds, this is just a crash. And then all I did was, well, pretty simple. I added a little bit of delay and then an Arts Acoustic Reverb. without all these. It's kind of has a sidechain quality to it just in the sample itself. And I just wanted it a little bit longer, which is why I put the delay and why I put this reverb with a pretty long time. Just because I in this uplifting trance, sometimes you have these big reverb sounds. It helped it fit in the mix a little bit better. Then it's going through an EQ, and during certain parts of the track, I actually automate this EQ so that it's a little bit darker, especially during the breakdown. And I also automate this extra delay that I added just for a longer crash that's a little bit more distant. So if you listen here, wait, not there, just kidding. It's around here somewhere. I think it's gonna be like here, for instance. Take a listen to this. Which sounds very different than that. Just the filter, that's the only difference between those two sounds. And I could have used the filter built into SynthMaster as well. I think it's just, for me, it was just easier to, once I had it there, just to add this EQ and automate it, even though I could have just as easily done it in SynthMaster. Then a reverse crash, pretty much the same thing. I didn't actually put any reverb on it because it sounded so good the way it was. That's with the filter automated. Some really nice sounding reverb on there. And what I did with these is I turned the release all the way up. So that way all I needed to do was just punch in like a single note and it would play the entire length of the sample. So now continuing on with these effects, I have these noise sweeps going throughout the track, which is just white noise. And I use SynthMaster 2 for this. And the reason is because you kind of have this nice way of controlling the slope if you wanted it to be a little bit more gentle. But this is just a bandpass filter with white noise going through that filter. And I used 2 voices of white noise, that way I could kind of spread them out across the stereo field. And basically all I'm doing is automating the cutoff throughout the track. And it's also going through some interesting things. So it's going through some distortion, very light distortion, and also a phaser, just to kind of give it a tiny bit of movement, just so it's just not boring white noise. So let's take a listen. And then, of course, I placed dotted eighth note delay on here, Arts Acoustic Reverb, just to kind of give it that space, and an LFO tool for sidechain, which I'm automating the amount throughout the track because I don't want that going on in the breakdown. And then last but not least, this is just volume automation for it as well. So if you notice, if I open up the automation here, these sweeps down I'm getting by automating the mod wheel throughout the track, which I have mapped to the filter cutoff here. So if I move the mod wheel around, you can kind of, well, you probably can't see it, but that will change the cutoff. And then I also adjust the volume so I can kind of create my own sweeps and stuff. And I duplicated this channel and I pretty much copied it but used a different one for sweep up. But what I changed is I changed where the filter was because I like the sweeps down to have a lot more high frequency energy and the sweep up to be a little bit darker so that you don't, it's a little bit different in character. So listen to this. And these are a little bit shorter too. Whoops. Cool. Now we're going to move on to the noise riser. So what this is what's called resampling. So I recorded SynthMaster playing white noise with a phaser on it. Although I also found that if you use this there's this wavetable with this grainy noise, you could do the same thing without having to go through this process. But what I did is I took white noise within SynthMaster and put a phaser on it, or a flanger. I think I actually put just a phaser in SynthMaster, and rendered it down as a clip to audio, just a 16-bar loop. And then what I did is I put it in the sampler here in live and I just automated the pitch. So if you think about what's going on now, you kind of have the phaser is creating this comb filtering effect. And now as we are increasing the pitch, it's just moving the comb up in the frequency spectrum. So it kind of creates this what I consider to be a Nicky Romero sounding riser. Take a listen to this. And that pitch is just being done by the transposition here in the sampler. Next up, we have a SynthMaster doing the synth riser. This is really cool. So what I did is I mapped a bunch of stuff to the pitch wheel, sorry. So that way, as we move the pitch wheel, as we're doing this riser, let's do it over here. Oh, I have to actually solo it. So as the pitch is opening, the high pass filter, there's a high pass and a low pass filter. The low pass filter opens, the high pass filter opens near the end so that it cuts out some of the lows at the end. The pitch is moving around, and I think I'm using the reverb built in here to automate the dry wet within SynthMaster 1 so it becomes more washed out. So listen to the synth riser. This is the short 8-bar version of it, but I also use it as a 16-bar version, different in the track. And of course at the end I go down back to the starting note. So for the 8-bar version it's only going up 1 octave. For the 16-bar version it's starting an octave lower and then going up, which I use in some of these larger sections of the track. Right now it's only really before the drop, but I also have in the full like club edit of the track, it's also being used before the sub comes in. Moving on, this is a hall kick. So I synthesized a kick drum sample within SynthMaster 1 by using a swept sine wave, where I think I used mod envelope 1 to adjust the pitch, and then an Arts Acoustic Reverb. So this would be like how like the TR-909 kick drums are generated. Then just put some reverb on it to give it that hall effect. So that's being used all over the place, all sorts of fills. You also hear it in the breakdown, but here's a good example right before the mini drop. Right here. Cool, sounds pretty good. Then I made a different version of this that is a little bit longer on the decay, because I like these to be short because I want it to start, hit, and then end so that the low end isn't interfering with the sub bass when I'm just using it for like a fill. But in the breakdown, I didn't want it to be quite as short, so I made another version that's a little bit longer. Let's just listen to this by itself. Just a larger reverb and I think a little bit of different envelope on the sample, but still swept sine noise, or swept sine wave. Then I created this sub drop, which is just used, I think it's only used, it's used in a few places, but mainly used in this break. So really what this is this is a swept sine noise, but the decay on the pitch envelope is really short, or really long. And quite a bit of release on that sample, so it fades out nicely. But the nice thing about this, synthesizing this rather than using a sample, is you can start it at any note you want. Pretty cool, and then it just kind of pitches around, which is neat. So you can always tune it to your track. And I'm just using mod envelope 1 again. Cool, so those are all the effects that I'm using here in the track. Once again, all of these are, I guess all of them are from SynthMaster in one way or another. And it's kind of cool because that really adds a lot of the sort of atmosphere sound to the track, except for the actual atmosphere that I'll get to in a little bit. Then we get on the fills and rolls. So I got this snare roll that is from SynthMaster, just a snare sample that is being used to create these snare rolls. I'm passing it through a reverb, but I'm also using the mod wheel here to control the filter. So this filter is doing some more of the sound design. It's a high pass filter, so as the snare roll progresses, it cuts out more and more of the low end. And then this filter is both shaping the kind of snare itself and also doing kind of a low pass. But I could have just as easily used the second filter in SynthMaster 2 to also do the low pass. And here's the reverb. So let me solo this. Actually, let me find a more interesting one because that one's boring. So automating the filter, automating sort of the volume as well. This is before the breakdown, so I didn't want it to be too crazy, but here's where you can hear it open all the way pretty much. And that volume automation, I'm actually using the volume automation rather than the velocities because it's just a little bit easier to draw on the curves you want. I used to always draw on all the velocities, and well, you have some control. I think it's a little bit easier to do it this way. Then it goes to, I have this fill. This was just a sample. I found this in this old 90s sample CD. It was from a Jungle sample pack, but it's probably one of the best sounding fills I've ever heard. So it's just used in all sorts of places. I don't think I'm using this second one at all. I had created a duplicate because I thought the first initial hit was, I guess, too much, and then I changed my mind the next day. Go figure. And then I got these two claps, which are just kind of part of the fill that we have here. So listen to it with the with this drum fill. This one in particular has a super long tail, which is just really nice and kind of bleeds over into the drop so things don't feel too abrupt. But once again, you know, could have used the clap that we synthesized before and just put a big reverb tail on it as well. Now moving on to the acid samples, or acid sounds. There are 3 acid sounds and they're all using SynthMaster, of course, big surprise there. First one is a TB303 sounding acid from SynthMaster 2. Take a listen. And I'm automating all sorts of stuff here. I'm automating the mod wheel, which is controlling the filter. I'm also automating the resonance, the envelope amount, and the decay time of the envelope, which is this one. So all of those are being automated just kind of throughout the track. You can kind of see them all here, Easy 2, Easy 3, mod wheel, and also just automating the filter to kind of bring it in and make sure it's not too harsh early on. And that's playing throughout the track. And in terms of just processing, I use this overdrive effect here in live, but I think I also use the distortion. Oh, I use the lo-fi and the ensemble, which are just helping make the sound a little more interesting. That ensemble is really cool. It almost reminds me of the Dimension Expander in Massive. Let's move on to the second acid. Really just a sawtooth, just 2 sawtooth waves. One's a sawtooth and the other one's kind of a mix between a square and a sawtooth wave. But it's kind of more of a square. And it's just these two, one's pitched an octave down, and going through the distortion is doing a lot of the work here in SynthMaster 1. It's kind of like a plucky sound with the distortion. That's what's really doing most of the tonal characteristics of it. And last but not least, we got this third acid sound. I use this both a pulse wave, and then I found this Doug Formant wavetable, which sounds really cool. It almost has this FM quality, especially when you run it through this distortion, this FabFilter Saturn, which I haven't bothered to enter in my license code since I bought it. And this is kind of being played throughout the track too. It's also being used here in this little fill. Let me find it right before the hands up, so take a listen. Let's hear it in context. Kind of in the background in a lot of places, in the drop and in the intro and stuff, but still adding a lot. I like that sound a lot. And last but not least, the last sort of sample, or the last SynthMaster instance that I'm using, is for this atmosphere sounding part. And all it is, this is crazy. SynthMaster 1, a sawtooth, a single voice sawtooth. Pretty straightforward. What's doing all the work in this case is the Valhalla Shimmer, which is this pitch shifting reverb plugin. Take a listen to this. So this is without it. This is with it. So you can hear the pitch kind of moving around. So when you play it an octave lower, let's play it. Anyway, I hope you guys found this helpful. Once again, if you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment. And good luck to everyone who is entering their song for this competition. Hopefully there's a lot of good tracks made, because SynthMaster is a great synth, and glad to see it getting a lot of love. So thank you guys for watching this, and hope you learned something, and definitely check out the full version of this track. I'll have a link in the description. See ya.